So why don't we go ahead and get started? Once again, welcome to everyone joining us this evening for our virtual family workshop. We're really glad that you can make it. So that's a little bit more detail about who we are as a department. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Elizabeth, who is going to go ahead and start tonight's presentation.
Thank you. Sorry, I heard a loudspeaker in the background. So I wanted to go over the goal of today, and this is pretty much taken directly from the summary of what today's workshop was going to be. So I really tried to focus on helping parents, guardians, or whoever the adult is, right, for the student, guide their children in resolving conflict effectively and respectfully. From my role, as Luis said, I get to speak with a lot of parents and schools around the conflict that arises. I only hear usually the concerns and the problems that are coming through. And so I've had a lot of experience in helping navigate families and helping navigate the conversations they're having with students to help resolve conflict at school. It's not getting any easier necessarily. Our youth aren't getting any nicer. And so a lot of it is skills at schools and skills at home, and how do we just align our efforts. So I'm hoping that's the huge takeaway. So those are going to include strategies for building empathy, strengthening communication, encouraging positive problem solving habits that are going to be beneficial in school and pretty much lifelong. I mentioned earlier, I'm a parent in the district, and so I do can stand by what I say. A lot of what I share are things I try to practice. I also preface and tell families that there's no real, magic wand that I'm waving or that anybody has that, gets rid of conflict, or a magic wand to help solve conflict soon. These are skills and tools that I think and that have shown, right, we need to equip our kids with so that they can help manage these situations in their everyday life. And then we can also be better equipped to deal with just the evolving world. Things are different from when we were in school. Honestly, no matter what age you are, they're definitely different from when we were in school. And so with that, we have to keep our toolbox, refreshed and make sure that we're equipping our kids, because that's really what it is making sure that they're equipped and they have the knowledge, the skills, the tools, and they have the practice to then use those in school, at home, right? It works with siblings, it works at home, it works with relationships outside of school, it works with relationships as you're older, and so, like I mentioned, hopefully these are going to be helpful in and out of school. It's probably nothing you haven't heard before. A lot of times it's a refresher, or hearing things and thinking that's where maybe I need to refine, or that's where I can hone in and focus on with my kiddo. Maybe you're going to hear something today that's going to help with a specific skill that you might want to help build either in your kiddos or in yourself. So with that, Luis mentioned a little bit about our role, so I'm not going to go over everything, but yes, we're the superintendent's designee for working with schools and families when problems get to the district office. What that means is I'm tasked with and have the privilege of facilitating collaboration with our school team and our home team, right? I like to think we're all on the same team, which is the students team, but really building and maintaining a strong relationship between school and home. And then, as I mentioned a little bit ago, supporting parents in navigating the school system. We are a huge district, and in any district, there are a lot of processes, policies, practices, staff names, rules. And so that's not easy when you get to a problem or a concern you're trying to work through, and maybe you have to talk to several people. Maybe you have to send out certain emails. And so part of my role is also just assisting in that process so that parents aren't frustrated and throw in the towel, because we've seen that that doesn't help with solving problems. It actually just allows them to grow bigger. So I'll talk a little bit about conflict. Conflict is normal, but not always comfortable. I use this as a first slide to just kind of remind everyone that everyone's tolerance level for conflict is different. That starts early on. I'm sure as parents and maybe parents of multiple kiddos, we see everyone has a different tolerance, right? Or a different level at which they operate with conflict. Different perspectives of the same situation. So keeping in mind that when there's conflict, it's almost always because there's a different perspective of the same situation that just happened. And again, as parents, I reference a lot the sibling interactions because I see a lot of parallel to what I sometimes work through at home, and you likely do work through at home with siblings, to how we work through it at school when a situation is presented to us with a kiddo and their peer or their friend. And then we're keeping in mind we all make assumptions, we all have biases. I won't go too deep into that, but the idea is we do all have some biases, or we do all have kind of what I call the assumption or the judgy mind that sometimes is the one that's quick to jump to conclusions or quick to say things. And then when we are a little calmer, we can think a little more logically through maybe what should be happening, what are the next steps, or what do we have to do as either the adult or the student, the child in that situation. Common causes of conflict. So obviously there's several causes of conflict. I'm trying to narrow them down to a lot of the big ones. So miscommunication, competition among peers, I see that a lot. Differences in values and beliefs, right? So just clashing, whether it's differences in personalities, beliefs, um, how we perceive fairness or respect. Scarce resources, that's one that maybe we don't think about too often, but keeping that in mind is helpful. Power struggles, so especially with our kiddos, and I try to speak generally, keeping in mind that I know elementary and middle and high school are all very different, but there are themes throughout, and some examples that I'll try to give, or even better if I get some feedback or input from some of the folks joining, that can help our conversation on what those look like at the elementary, middle, and high school level. And then fear, respect was one that I also kind of wanted to put on here, or perceived respect. Um, Next slide. So teaching conflict resolution at home. Again, in my role, by the time a concern or a report comes here, there might have already been some of this happening at home. But a lot of the times, these are some of the best practices that I see that lead to an effective road to that problem solution, or effective management of the problem. I'll use those words kind of interchangeably because sometimes we solve problems and they go away, and that's great. And then sometimes we manage problems to make sure that they just remain something that's manageable, something that we can continue to work through, because not everything gets resolved, especially when we're talking about just a human being's emotions, feelings. Sometimes we manage it and it just, it may not be resolved and kind of tied up in a pretty bow. So these are more for parents. So I put at home. So leading by example is key. And again, a lot of this is going to be some like self-reflection, nothing that you don't know, but maybe some refining or enhancing. So leading by example, remembering that our kiddos are always watching, listening to us, looking to us as their first teachers to see how we react to situations that might frustrate us. So that could be a situation at home, that could be a situation in traffic, that could be how we respond to hearing about something that happened at school. Just keeping in mind that they're always watching and learning. And so, believe it or not, a lot of the skills they have are probably skills they've learned or picked up, or habits that they have learned and picked up from home or somewhere else. Encouraging open communication. So, is there some feedback? No, okay, I think someone just unmuted. Encouraging open communication within the relationship with your student, and then also with your school side. But in this case, I'm talking more about knowing your child's friends, knowing their relationships, so the good ones, the bad ones, bonus points if you know the name, but really just getting to know who and what dynamic they bring. And that happens naturally a lot of the times if you're facilitating these conversations, but they're helpful when you pay attention and listen and know who these relationships are. So when something happens, you somewhat know the dynamic, or maybe you know how valuable that relationship is to the student, to your kiddo. And it might also determine just how invested or how much you want to put into trying to solve this problem. Believe it or not, open communication and just talking daily about their day-to-day, their everyday, their real life, is gonna help you feel a little more in the know when there's a problem, and you kind of already maybe know that social circle or the dynamics of that teacher, if maybe something happened in class. I can't emphasize enough that if you can, right? If schedules allow, or if you can, to just have that dialogue about school and their school life. I will refer to school a lot of times as my kiddos, or as when I speak with parents, this is their real life. This is their 9 to 5. A lot of times we give advice from an adult perspective, and we say things like, just ignore that, or it's no big deal. And the reality is, to us as adults, it's not a big deal, but to our students, it's what they're facing every day, right? It's their real life, it's their real social setting, it's everything to them. And so I try to keep that in mind when, in my 37-year-old brain, I'm thinking, this is so not a real world problem. So that's exactly what I'm talking about when I say problem solving skills. So guide them in working and keeping in mind their age and ability. This is their real world, right? Sometimes we might need to find creative solutions to things. Not everything is as black and white as our children present things to us. In their mind, right? It's like either this or that. I like them or I hate them. We're friends or not. And it doesn't have to be that black and white. But that is something that comes with development and growth. The importance of emphasizing empathy and understanding. So asking questions around what the other person's perspective is. So I'm thinking a kiddo comes home, shares a situation or a conflict, whether it's new or ongoing. Obviously, the first bit of time is spent on like the details, right? What happened, who, what, when, where, why are kind of all the questions I'm asking. And I do try to get as many details as possible. So where, right? So, for example, we were in the bathroom. Okay, well, you're likely not in a stall together. So were you in the bathroom? Were you washing hands? Well, I was in line. I was walking into the bathroom and she was washing her hands. And this person, and it sounds a little investigative. I promise you it's not when you're having dialogue. It actually shows them you're tuning in and you're listening, but it helps you get the details to understand, how did this really happen? Was there a buildup? Was it really random and spontaneous? And obviously during those conversations, asking for some context. Sometimes my kiddos will post things to me in a way that sounds a lot more serious than it is. And I will say, well, was that what was said? Or do you know that that's what happened for sure? And sometimes it's like, well, I heard my friend saying it, or I heard that maybe they said this about me. And so getting as much clarity as we can from them. And again, I recognize their age. If they're littler, like K through third or so, you always don't get the most accurate details. By like fourth, fifth, and sixth, I feel like kids have a better grasp of their relationships and kind of reading the room. And then obviously, seventh, eighth, seventh, and 12th, I feel like then we're helping them really dive in and gaining these skills. So one question I use for empathy and understanding, once I've listened to my student and listened to my kiddo and gotten the details, and obviously through all that, if you if you hear kiddos share their problems, they never fail to share like how this impacts them, like how they feel wronged, what was done to them. And it's really beneficial in that conversation to say, like, let's consider the other perspective. So what happened, right? Most people aren't inherently mean or violent or whatever. And so what happened? Like, well, how did we lead to this? How did we get to this situation? And in that, having some time to say, is there something you might have done that either could have triggered this or did help the situation? Or is there something you could have done differently that might have changed how this worked out? And that's never a way to shift the blame over to the person that is expressing this problem. It really isn't. It is a way to reflect, to just say, could this have gone a different way had I done something? And that's a big question, right? I know adults that don't have a lot of these skills. And so it's tough, but that is what I've seen work. That is what I truly believe works when we're speaking with our children and then collaborating with the school on next steps. Any questions so far? We have a couple more of these in the home, but any questions or feedback or maybe an example or anything like that? If so, feel free to raise your hand or pop it in the chat. Because if not, I'll just continue to the next slide. Okay. So our next slide, I have some more on teaching conflict resolution at home. So setting boundaries and teaching respect. Again, straightforward. I'm pretty sure everyone's doing this already. But reinforcing that the importance of respecting others' boundaries and then expressing your own needs in a respectful manner. That's probably more appropriate, honestly, at all grade levels, but we're introducing this at the elementary level, right? I know with my 4-year-old, I am constantly reminding her of tone and how you ask for things or how you respond or manners. And I know how important it is young because if it's, she's definitely the baby and probably doesn't get checked as much as our older kiddos do. But I've seen how that can kind of spiral if we always let it be, well, she's little or she's younger, or I don't expect her to know that yet. It's never too early to teach how to express yourself in a respectful manner, and how to set boundaries. And boundaries are crucial with peers, with honestly anyone. But in this case, I'm talking about peers, friends, and relationships that you're having at school. Um, Providing guidance and support. So as a parent, our job is to give tools on how to respond to the real scenarios that they are experiencing. We serve as their guide, we serve as their first teacher. And so then through doing some of these previous, right, conversations on leading or on getting the details and speaking with our children, having dialogue, there's a point that you want to identify, do I need to give some specific tools or skills on setting boundaries? When I think of elementary level, we don't have kiddos a lot that know how to set appropriate boundaries because they've never been in a school setting where they've had to. And so that's a good skill that by the time we get to upper elementary and middle school, without having a skill set where we know how to set boundaries, be assertive, and be respectful in that, then we have some problems with communication, or we have some problems with dealing with a peer at the age of 11 or 12 or 13 years old. If we struggle with boundaries, that can lead easily to peer pressure. That can lead easily to situations that maybe make somebody feel uncomfortable. That could lead to a real power, like an imbalance of power in a relationship. And so I won't spend too long on that, but just constantly reminding ourselves as parents that it's on us to also identify where we can help, and build those skills. And then role playing. I'm a firm believer that role playing these situations at home, with kiddos it's really powerful in the sense that it's their safe space and they know that at home, like this isn't getting the attention and this isn't nothing like what it is at school. However, I do ask that if you practice or have role plays, that you encourage your student to really practice tone or practice setting boundaries. When I first did this with my boy, when he was probably 4th or 5th grade, it was almost funny to him, right? He couldn't take it seriously. He's like, I don't talk like that. I don't use those, I don't use that tone. This is funny. And I had to really kind of dive into a situation with him and his friend and say, okay, so what if this was happening? How do you respond? And in that, trying to say, okay, this is when you could say that, or this is when you should walk away, or and so role playing it helps so that when they are out on the playground or the blacktop or the soccer field, it feels a little more familiar. I tell my kiddos it's not the same than being in front of your peers and being like flushed with heat and your heart's pounding. It's not the same, but hopefully they can draw back to that scenario and say, okay, I know what I'm supposed to do here. I'm going to try it. I'm going to try responding the way I've practiced before. And those are great for problematic situations, low level situations. Um, I think they're good for everything, but they're really good at being preventative, preventing things from getting out of control, escalating. Okay, and then the next slide is really just for your information. I pulled this from a different slide. So I used to be in bullying prevention and social emotional learning. And as a parent, when I entered that role, I was already a parent, but I wasn't aware of all that schools do to teach our kiddos. So they teach a lot more than academics. They are actually responsible, and it is embedded in our standards that we teach kiddos what they call these 5 core competencies. And so this could be a number of ways that schools are doing this. It could be school-wide with a curriculum. It could be mini lessons. It could be a reward system the school has. It could be, you might have heard the words PBIS, positive behavior intervention support. But really all I want you to take away from this slide are these 5 bolded competencies, because I do elaborate on them in the next few slides. And these are what California pulled out and said these are the most important skills that we want to teach outside of academics. And it's self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision making. huge focus on this, and this really ties into teaching that whole child, right? We know that a successful student who is struggling mentally, emotionally, or socially is likely not going to perform well academically. And that's just, again, the reality of being a human being, and we operate on more than just our brains, right? We have a lot more going on, we're complex. And so a lot of my conversations when problems arise hone in on these types of these competencies or these skills, because they really are the key. They've been determined to be the most important for our kiddos to be successful, not outside of the academic world, right? So social, emotional learning, and also with respect to their mental health. So this goes in directly into the conflict management for students. Um, those are those competencies where what we want students to have. And so this focuses on what we want to build within our students. And obviously, parents, you have a role in this. The school has a role in this. And then as the student grows and develops and matures, they have a role in this. Self-awareness. So how do my emotions, thoughts, values influence my actions? Am I aware? Do I know my triggers? This allows you to be more effective in identifying your individual strengths, weaknesses, and emotional triggers. If you have kids at home that are close in age, like I do, they likely know each other's triggers. I have a 13-year-old boy and 11-year-old girl, and they know exactly what makes the other tick. And they know what makes oneself tick. So they're very self-aware. Now, outside in school, are they aware of what, of what makes them tick and how this impacts their communication with peers? Are they aware of pretty much all the decisions they're making throughout the day and how it's impacting their future? Are they aware of their strengths and their weaknesses, right? So if you're an impulsive kiddo, or let's try the other side, if you're a really shy kiddo, and you know that, you may have identified within yourself that it's hard to set boundaries or it's hard to participate in conflict, right? And oftentimes that type of personality will be the type that can be, I don't like to say an easy target, but kiddos will often think that the quiet or a shy kid is an easy target. And so being self-aware will help, right? And saying, okay, I know I may come across this way. I know this is a weakness of mine. I'm working on it. And obviously the students or kiddos aren't understanding this all on their own. As parents and at school, we're helping them be more self-aware. Self-management. So how do you regulate and control yourself? An example of this is pausing before you react, right? Not being so impulsive. If you have a teenager, you likely have an impulsive kiddo, right? There's a quick response to a lot of things. Social awareness, your ability to empathize with others, your ability to take the perspective of those in different situations than yourself. And also being aware, I like to categorize this one as reading the room. I say that a lot. Read the room, read the room. Like where is what you're contributing either fitting? Is it helping the situation? Is it not? Is now the time and place? So being aware of social setting and kind of how you fit in. Any questions so far? I feel like I'm throwing a lot out there. And like I said, it's likely not new, but any feedback so far? Questions? Examples? No? Okay. Couple more. After practicing conflict management for students, we got about 3 more, which is choosing your friends wisely. Again, you probably already preached this. I definitely encourage my kids, all kids, surround yourself with peers who are positive influences. It doesn't mean they have to be straight A students, or, student government president or anything like that. I just tell my kiddo, think about who you want to be around and who's going to help make you better, who is helping contribute something in your relationship with them or in your life with them. And who maybe when you look at the other person and ask those same questions, who's maybe not having the greatest influence or really filling your bucket or really adding to that relationship. As a friend, I say your peers should be encouraging you to walk away from conflict. They should be encouraging you to be nonviolent. Your peers should not be encouraging you to fight. And I'm keeping all this in mind, knowing that kiddos are impulsive, and sometimes the culture is that it's cooler to respond by physical or be fighting, but really a true friend is not going to want you to be in that situation. And so again, as parents, we're guiding them to figure out who is truly who you want to have surrounding you. I always hated the phrase that my mom said, right? Tell me who your friends are and I'll tell you who you are. I hated that because I thought, Mom, they do not define me. I am my own person. I hear my kiddos say that, and it is true to an extent. However, I challenge kiddos to say, then, let me know what that peer or what that friend or that relationship brings to the table, and why you value them so much. And are we really valuing them for the right things? Kiddos, avoiding gossip and rumor, those only lead to increased conflict, and they only lead to really getting sucked in more into the conflict. You are a spectator or an outsider, starting to pass rumors or gossip puts you directly in the line of fire when it comes to who's involved, who was part of this conflict, whether you fueled it, whether you started it. I can't stress that enough of just avoid the gossip and rumors, especially on social media, especially on the internet. That's a huge challenge for all of our teens, and that is part of that evolving world that I talked about earlier, where it's not just your school day now and you go home and you're hoping things to die down. It's your school day, it's the internet, it's a post online. It never stops for kiddos. And so gossips and rumors can quickly make a bad situation worse. And then always seeking support. I encourage all students to talk to someone they trust on campus, also at home, but I'm talking about on campus for guidance, for support in managing conflict and thoughts of impulsive behavior. Hopefully, if they speak with a counselor or an adult, they're going to help with creating some strategies on what they can do when they are in high conflict situations. How to best collaborate with your school team. So this is where in my role, I obviously focus on trying to give these skills to parents when there's a problem that occurs and they've called our office. That usually means that we are not, and when I say we, I mean the family is not feeling like they're getting the support they need at school, or they're getting the response they want from school. And so keeping our school teams informed. I always say if something's happening in class, reach out directly to that teacher. You can have your email on portal. Luis is going to go over some of the resources that the district has after, but going on student portal, knowing their email address. When I hear my kiddo say, this happened in second period, I right away try to think back to one, who that teacher is. And in those previous conversations we might have had, is that where you had this kiddo that you were struggling with? Or, oh, wow, that's a class you usually really like and really enjoy. What changed? Why is there problems in that class? It might be a teacher that you have a good relationship, or maybe, you don't. But in any case, an email to a teacher is always best practice when something's happened in their class. I know a lot of folks will go to the principal, and that's a great second or third step. A lot of times, most of the time, the principal has to go back to the teacher and say, hey, I learned of this situation. Can you fill me in on what happened? And so going straight to the source, whether it's a teacher, a PE teacher, a coach, if this happened in sports, just going kind of straight to the source to put it on their radar, one, and to see if they have any information as well. I do say, and I think I said this in one of the first slides, when that concern first comes to you from, your student, and you're trying to figure out the best next steps, keeping in mind that you've gotten that one perspective is very important at this time, because we're communicating back with the school to say, this is what I learned, this happened, maybe it was a fight, maybe it's a situation that's turning into a bullying scenario. But in any case, they don't know what they don't know. And so as long as we keep them informed, we can help also keep our schools accountable. I'm all for accountability with our schools. We also have to understand that they need time to investigate, to follow up on things. They have to speak to another side of that, of that conflict, as well. So with that comes, confidentiality, not being able to share what's happening on the other side, but trying to make those conversations as productive and effective as possible. So really just focusing on the facts, the next steps, and then really the big part of that is, does your child need help in navigating or working through this right now. So it's, a child brings home a problem, parent is addressing it at home, parent is sharing it with the school site. And now all we can tell our student, our child is, hey, these are the best practices I want you to do to avoid this from escalating. I've done what I needed to do. Your school's aware. Usually it's kind of like a sit tight for 24 to 48 hours until I hear back. And then from there, right, depending on whatever that might be, the collaboration continues. I will say when you're doing all of this, to keep in mind, we have our district follow something called progressive discipline. Our district is also a pretty big believer and fan of restorative practices. And so progressive discipline simply means that when it's your first offense or a lower level offense, and when I say offense, I mean an ed code violation, something at school that can get you a disciplinary measure or a consequence. We try to start with the lowest level, right? We try to start with something that's restorative, a conversation, an apology letter, detention, picking up trash, something where we're hopefully helping or putting you in a situation where there's time to reflect on the situation that happened without it being, you're losing instructional time, you're going home, you're getting suspended. And I've heard both sides of this from a parent perspective. Sometimes a parent feels if there's not a suspension or a harsh consequence that the school is not taking things seriously, or another quote is the school is not doing anything. Almost never is the school not doing anything. A lot of times they're doing things they can't share if it's on the other end with another student. A lot of the times they are taking the right steps that they have to take, and we're just not seeing, we as parents aren't seeing the outcome we want. And that's because a lot of the times the outcome that we want is for another student to change their behavior. And this is pretty specific to that. I mean, if there's academic issues or issues with teachers or facilities or something like that, that's different. I'm usually talking peer-to-peer conflict. And so when that happens, we are looking at the situation is involving two youth, whatever age, developmental stage they're at, but we're asking, or we're now wanting to encourage pro-social behavior, teach pro-social behavior, and hope that we can do so in a way that either leads us to a resolution, or like I said before, we can just kind of manage this problem and it's not that big of a problem that requires so much attention, right? It was squashed, or it was, it's over, or we are avoiding each other, we're staying away from each other, if the plan is not to restore the relationship. So restorative practice is that. It's saying, let's try to restore the relationship. Let's meet with a counselor facilitating a conversation. We used to have a program in our schools called Youth Mediators in Schools, where we had a partnership where they helped mediate. They helped build mediation skills in our students. And we had kind of like these ambassadors that would help then and serve as the mediators with an adult, but to help build skills for them on how to work through these issues. We use mediation, in the courts, we use mediation in everything. And so it's used in schools, and it's used with the hope that we can either restore relationships, save relationships, or really decide if, hey, we tried everything and we're both going to agree to disagree. We're both going to decide that going our separate way is probably the best plan here. As they get older, right, we learn we don't need to be friends with everybody, but we do need to kind of go back to what I said, right? Be respectful and all those competencies. So just keeping in mind progressive discipline, the discipline that we give at schools may not be the discipline that we want as parents. And even asking more, it's fine to inquire about, I don't feel like this matches really what happened to my kid. Can you explain why there's not a harsher consequence? Or can you explain, what would happen if this continues to escalate? And that's the collaboration. So that's that collaboration on next steps. That's saying, hey, what's the plan? Are we taking steps to make any changes at school, whether it's a schedule change or counselors getting involved, devising that plan together. I said in the beginning too, always keeping it student focused, always keeping it solution based. A lot of time when we as parents bring problems, it's kind of us just regurgitating this whole problem to the school without maybe thinking of what the solutions could be, or on your end, what you can do to help with managing this for your student. And the school definitely could use your partnership on that. I always say we're on the same team, which is the students' team, but it is a partnership. So if we know what's going on at schools, hopefully we are aligning that at home. If we're sharing at home and saying, this is what I'm doing, then hopefully that's being affirmed, at least at school, or, replicated. Scheduling a follow-up if needed, so keeping the communication open and frequent, and then always continue to guide your student in working through situations. So, excuse me, when I say guide them, I mean really determine whether or not every situation is something that you as a parent need to get involved in. And you probably know what I'm talking about when you hear situations that are presented from, again, any grade level, elementary, middle, or high, but some things when you're hearing them, you can kind of hear how serious they are to your student. For example, my fifth grade girl will tell me every bit of what happened at school today. And sometimes tends to focus more on maybe the negative or, what didn't go well at school, or an interaction she had. And can you believe she said this? And so I listen and also remember not everything deserves my reaction, or not everything are they looking for a solution or the answer. A lot of times they're just sharing, but I do clarify often and say, is that something you got that taken care of? Is that a problem? In her fifth grade brain, again, I'd expect her to have a certain set of skills at fifth grade level to work through. There are times when things become, or I tell her, like, keep me, for example, the other day she got moved next to a little girl who she says is not very nice to her. And I said, kind of keep me in the loop on that. I know you guys have not gotten along for years. How did that move happen, first of all, right? And it turns out another student was being chatty. And so they just switched her with this other student. And she just happened to end up at the table with probably the girl she's least fond about in her whole school. So right away, that was a topic of discussion. And I said, is it a problem yet? Do you want me to reach out to the school and just ask if there could be a seat change, maybe? Because I don't see that going well. And again, I'm taking heavily into consideration that she's almost entering middle school. And I'm saying, do you want me to take some steps now? And she immediately said, no, I'm fine. I'm just gonna sit there. It's fine. It's no big deal. And I, said, okay, cool. Keep me informed. And maybe that was a mistake, because then I feel like every day I'm getting the lowdown on what happened at her group. But she did keep me informed, and within a week or two, I did have to ask the teacher to consider a class change or a seat change, because there was just unpleasant interactions, minor things that are being said at the table that no one else is probably hearing. And the impact on my daughter at that point was so high that I, just said, please, if you could do this. And I was willing to share more information if I needed to, give some background. I did say also, you can speak with the principal. I've given her a little bit of background in the past, but it's never escalated. It's always been really minor things. And so finally at my parent teacher conference, I was informed, yep, we've changed her. And the teacher actually said, I wanted to see on my own, because a couple days went by. I don't think I heard anything for about 3 days. And my daughter kept saying, I'm seated at the same spot. I'm seated at the same spot. And I said, I will wait till conference time. And sure enough, the teacher said, I kind of wanted to see some of the dynamics. And I also wanted to be intentional with where I move kiddos, because apparently she had a lot of kiddos that can't be near each other or have problems. And so that was just an example of how I help, or how I let my kiddos kind of help also guide me on what do you need help with and what do you handle on your own. As the problems get bigger, right? We might say, hey, I'm coming into this now. I'm getting involved. I'm sending an email. We don't want them to put them in situations where they're practicing their skills and then they don't have everything that we would like them to have to effectively work through that. And so obviously then we have to come in when they need support from an adult, or call on, reinforcements at the school site for help. But I'm always really clear, even just with my 8th grader and my 5th grader, like what is a mom issue or a parent issue, and what can you handle in your 5th grade world or your 8th grade world. And again, just like keep me in the loop if things become a mom or dad issue. So that's my tip and trick with that one. If all else fails, that's what our department is here for, is when that doesn't go as planned, that collaboration or that communication doesn't happen the way we'd like. And then folks either, reach out to the district, our office directly, or our superintendent. And I like to think that our role always comes in as very supportive to our schools and families. I think sometimes there's this viewpoint that you come to the district and it's like this big scary place, or reporting you to the district, I expect these huge changes to happen when really, and honestly, I have been met with a lot of cooperation and not resistance. But when I tell parents, really all we're going to do is help me as a team and collaborate, because if the problem is happening at school, then we need to help resolve this at school. Coming to the district is great to get some additional support, to document the concern, to report the issues and make sure that they are in a system somewhere, because I understand how important documentation is. But at the same time, it's also more important to maintain that school to home relationship. And if you're coming to the district because you feel the school has failed in some sense, we get up and try again, right? And for the most part, honestly, parents are very willing and very cooperative to try it again. And I think it's just known that that's what's going to lead to the best possible outcome and eventually their student being successful. I don't think any parent ever wants to have problems with their student's teacher, school, and conversely, the same goes for teachers. Like, they're not trying to make any students' life harder, or any principals trying to make life harder. That's the workings of a relationship when we have a student involved. And I'm fully aware the mama bear, the papa bear come out. At many of our principals, most of our principals are parents, and so they very much can relate to things, but they're in a very difficult role where they're having to educate and serve and protect, hundreds of students at their school at one time. And so it doesn't feel as much as of a priority as it does as us when we go and we're fighting for our R1 or R2. So I very much understand that, and I very much message that to our principals from a family perspective and a parent perspective. So I've seen a couple of comments come in the chat. I don't know if there's any questions. Helpful information, great. I am nearing the end. I know Luis has some announcements, but I am excited or just curious to know if there's any feedback, questions, scenarios, experiences you want to share out.
Yes, thank you so much, Elizabeth. And this is a great